Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Scots Whay Hae podcast. And today I'm joined by writer Martin MacIntyre to talk about his novel, A Summer Like No Other. I have my copy here, but I'm sure we'll discuss much more. But first of all, hello, Martin.
Hello there. Hello, Alistair. Thanks very much for having me.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure. We've been meaning to do this for a while, so it's good to finally get together to talk about your work, and particularly this novel. And before we talk about it, could you give us a reading from it?
Absolutely. Yes, indeed. Perhaps a wee bit of context. One of the key themes of the novel is this young fellow, Colin,
Yeah.
who records this old fellow of 88 from South Uist, who's got a whole store of amazing stories, and he's never been recorded. And this reading I'm going to do just now is Colin's first attempt at recording, and it's 1978. The World Cup's happening in Argentina. So he's using this large Ewer recorder machine. Anybody of a certain vintage will know there's a reel-to-reel recorder, state of the art at the time.
Yeah.
And those monologue years. Anything else I need to say? Yes, the reason he's doing this is because he's spending the summer with his uncle Ruadi from Barra, he's a doctor and he's doing a locum in South Uist, and he's also very keen in folklore, but he's a bit busy. So the young fellow, Colin, 20-year-old drifting student in Glasgow University, gets enlisted to do some of the recording. So I just thought I'd give you a flavour of that, and just to say also that this is the 8th of June 1978, so we all know immediately that the night before, the Wednesday, Scotland drew 1-1 with Iran in the World Cup.
Remember it well.
Which wasn't a great game, attended by very few people, and so that's the reference there. And Jane is the old fellow's grandniece and does a lot of the caring for him. So I jammed on the stop button and then, responding to his eager nod, rewound the tape. We listened back in silence to our efforts. My uncle's voice was imbued with considerable gravitas, a combination of his more measured thoughts and the bass distortion of the Ewer machine. He seemed satisfied both by the quality of the recording and its content. We could do a bit more, I suggested. What? I could interview you too in the quiet periods when old Alistair's dried up, just for fun, posterity, if you'd like. We'll see, Colin. The first task is to get that old fellow talking uninterrupted by fear of reprisal from the grandniece. She'll be there, of course. I knew she would, and felt strangely fearless. Jane had asked me to do this, so she'd have to support its achievements somehow. Jane had Alistair very presentable, washed and shaved within the last few hours, wearing a newer, darker jersey in the same pattern as the fawn one, and with a full but unlit pipe of tobacco. She was sitting on his throne to the right of the stove, having placed Alistair in the corner of the bench nearest to the heat. Plenty of space had been cleared so that I could sit there too and strategically position any equipment or papers between us. Jane was sporting a Cheshire cat grin, which didn't suit her. Was she nervous about how this recording was going to work out? What if it all failed? I proved an inept field worker, or Alistair, albeit knowledgeable, was unable in his advanced years to perform in front of a microphone or to a stranger. What then for Jane and her needs for this old boy? Tea now or afterwards, she asked. After, maybe, eh? She answered herself eagerly and lit a cigarette with tremulous haste, then her great-uncle's pipe. This gave me the opportunity to remove the recorder from its case and slot the microphone into its side. Jane evinced no interest in the kit. It had a job to do, that's all. She did, though, let out a rather bizarre whoop when I played back her faltering introductory remarks to make sure all was well with the tape and the recording levels as good as my uncle assured me they would be. The sound was lovely. Better, it seemed, than earlier in the day with Ruadi. Ha Michel, the Alistair di Camish on the Milton, I began. Garavarchus, he corrected, is the Gaelic. Jane coughed loudly and stubbed out her cigarette. Sorry, yes, I mean in Garavarchus. And what did you think of last night's game? I regretted my trite question the minute it left my lips. He looked over to Jane for help. Football, shouted Jane. He's talking about football. Remember I said Eowyn would be in... I thought he'd come about old things. Stories and that. You're right, she assured him. He's just making a start, I supplied, and followed that with, what did you have for breakfast this morning? God save me, he replied. That's a long time ago.
Thank you very much for that. And it introduces us to a number of the characters, and really the novel is character driven.
Yeah.
You know, these, I will talk more about them, I think, later on. But you've given us a brief overview as to the novel. Can you expand a little bit on that? Or like who Colin is? Because Colin's really the central character to everything.
He is, and it's a first person narrative. Yes, I mean, it's a coming of age novel in a way. He's 20. He's in second year at Glasgow University, didn't manage to sit his exams. He said he had too good a year. A lot of expectation. He's the first of his family to go to university. And he doesn't really know where he's going. So his mother suggests that it might be good for him to spend a few weeks with her brother, his uncle, Rory, in South Uist, in the company of somebody who's worked hard. Again, Rory, in his generation, was the first to go to university, and he became a doctor. He lives in Duns in the Borders, and he's been visiting Uist over many years, giving the local doctors an opportunity in the summer of having some respite and doing a locum for them. But he's come towards the end of his career. So it's about Colin's maturation, I think, his growing relationship with his uncle, whom I guess he saw, every so often at family events, but he's never spent 6 weeks with them.
Yeah.
So he and Rory become close to each other. Rory's had a few things that have knocked his confidence. He was widowed 18 months previously. There's things about his clinical practice that he's beginning to have doubts about, and that they're evident as well in the story. And Colin as well is not quite sure where he's going. And one of the things he does find out about himself is that he is a Gael, and I don't think he'd ever really considered that. He grew up in Greenock, of a Barra mother and a Paisley father, kind of comfortably bilingual, bicultural. But I think just that slight distance from Barra, where he spent many a summer, in Uist, and again involving himself in the folklore, I think makes him conscious of his identity as a Gael. And then, of course, his relationship with Jane, who's she's not that much older than Colin, 26, but has lived a very different life. She's got 3 young children. She's married to a brute of a guy, Ivor. And so another key factor is Colin's relationship with Jane and his abrupt introduction to the world of adulthood. And one of the things that echoes that across every chapter is the story of Ossian and the Gene and Og in the Land of Eternal Youth, where Ossian as well, there's loss of innocence and the abrupt arrival of adulthood.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to kind of pick apart there, Martin. But first of all, what inspired you to write this story?
Well, I've always been interested in stories, oral storytelling. In addition to writing, I tell stories orally, and have done so for as long as I've been writing, over 25 years. In Gaelic culture as well, we're very much aware of the collectors of stories. So these great collectors for the School of Scottish Studies, in fact, going back before then to the 1930s, John Lorne Campbell of Cana, and then Callum MacLean and the many collectors, John McInnes, Morag MacLeod, John Shaw, many, Dom Archie MacDonald, many collectors who recorded these stories, and these similar reel-to-reel recorders from about the 50s onwards. And I was involved in a project called Toper and Duochish of the Kista Riches, which basically helped to make these sound recordings all to retain them and to make them all accessible digitally, so you can, while you're waiting for the bus, you can now listen to these recordings on your phone, etc. So I've also been interested in the collecting of folklore and that intimate relationship between collector and storyteller or singer.
And it's also this, clash is the wrong word, but this meeting of generations, particularly Colin and Alistair, and and they're kind of different ways of one is unloading experience and stories, and one is learning all these for the first time.
Yeah,
I think that
yeah.
shapes Colin's identity, this new identity, or maybe rediscovered identity as a Gael as well. I mean, you're known as a writer who writes in Gaelic and English, and there is, as we've seen from your reading, there's Gaelic in the novel as well. And I was wondering about the use of it in the novel and how you managed to get the balance right, so to speak. Is that just natural as a bilingual speaker, or is it something you're aware of as you're writing?
Well, I suppose my approach to this one was slightly different because the novel originally came out in Gaelic in 2018.
Right.
Here it is. It's called Samhradh, the summer of 1978, summer of 78. So I had written the novel in Gaelic, but one of the key aspects of the novel, and in terms of Colin's finding his identity, I suppose, as a Gael, is bilingualism. And I think the dynamics of that bilingualism and the changes of that bilingualism is a key factor. So I'd already encountered Colin's English speaking voice. He speaks English to some people for various reasons. He initially speaks a lot more English to his uncle than he does as time goes on, and their relationship becomes a bit more adult, a bit more mature, then more Gaelic comes in. And as he's using his Gaelic a lot more with old Alistair, and his relationship with Jane is completely in Gaelic, and it's about so I suppose I knew I had his English speaking voice as well as his Gaelic speaking voice in my head, but I did want to convey to the English reader that we're in a very largely Gaelic world in 1978, and that part of South Uist was still very, largely a Gaelic speaking world. And I wanted to give the English reader some access to that.
Yeah, and you should say for people who haven't read it that the Gaelic is translated in footnotes, often at the bottom of the page, so you can absolutely follow it. But that's interesting. I didn't know that you'd originally written the whole novel in Gaelic. So why the decision to then do an English version? How did that come about?
Well, I thought it would be good, well, for a number of reasons. Obviously, to open up the book to an international audience, and I think Gaelic culture deserves to be read. Or stories, coming from Gaelic culture, deserve to be read by a worldwide audience. They've got things to say and important messages and important stories to tell. But also, I felt, as being a Gaelic writer for a long time, much of my fiction has not been translated, is that many Gaelic speakers don't comfortably read the language as well as as they can speak it. And in fact, if it was an audio book, they would all be able to sit down and it could be going on in the background and understand every word. There's nothing complicated about it.
Yeah.
But literacy is still an issue within the Gaelic community. So I also wanted to give a Gaelic story to the many Gaelic readers, some of whom bought my book in Gaelic, but didn't manage to finish it.
It's really interesting. I was talking recently with someone about the different languages of Scotland, and they were saying that, historically Gaelic is an oral language. That's the kind of basis of it rather than a literary language. That's maybe fairly recently that's been the case. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that. I mean, there's ancient manuscripts going back centuries, but largely, most people, or when society became more literate, then it was through English they became literate. And then one of the key factors sort of inhibiting our generation is the 1872 Education Act, which made absolutely no provision for the teaching of Gaelic and Gaelic-speaking areas. So for many years, up until previous generation, Gaelic speakers received very little, or just most of their education was through English. So many people have not developed that same comfort with Gaelic reading and writing, although they would understand every word, as I said, if they were hearing on the radio.
So the importance of everyday use, but also storytelling, as you said, oral storytelling and song as well would have been key.
Oh, hugely, hugely. And all these things, and memory and these things being transmitted from generation to generation over centuries. Some of the stories that old Alistair tells Colin in 1978 are, of medieval origin. The stories about the Finn McCool and the Thane and that band of warriors. They go back to medieval times. Well, medieval times when they were first written down, the presumption is that they were transmitted orally for many, many centuries earlier.
Well, can you talk about that aspect of the novel? Because at the start of every chapter, you have a little bit about Ossian and Finn McCool and that whole story that's being told. And what's the relationship between that, apart from Alistair telling them, but what's the relationship between that and the more modern novel that makes the more modern story that makes up the rest of the novel?
Well, I think that the Ossian was these warrior imaginary warrior superheroes. The leader of the band, who were called the Thane or the Fiantican, or the Fian was Finn McCool, big giant of a man. These stories originally came across from Ireland, but have been told in Scottish Gaelic society and there was, and one of the reasons I chose to set it in the 70s was these stories were still being told orally, having been heard, from previous generations then. But the particular story of Ossian travels to Cheadnanog, the land of eternal youth, with Princess Neve, and then he and everything. The promises that he gets of what the Cheadnanog's going to be like are amazing. Everybody's happy there all the time. The sun never sets, and nobody grows old. And he has a wonderful time for the first while, but he's been there about a year. He's beginning to miss home. He's beginning to miss the normal things of home, like really bad weather and wild weather, and people complaining now and again, waking up in the morning about Gurney. Everybody's so happy in Cheadnanog. So he eventually convinces her. He promised that he wouldn't go back home, but he eventually convinces her to allow him to return home. And he does, and he does once on the white horse that they go to Cheadnanog, and then he ends up. The promise is that he must stay on the horse, and he ends up falling off the horse. And he turns into an old man of over 300 years old because time has passed differently at home compared to in Cheadnanog. He's only been a year in Cheadnanog, but 300 years have passed back at home. And so for every year in Cheadnanog, a year had passed at home. So I thought there were echoes in that story to Colin's journey, his and that, especially there's elements of loss of innocence,
yes,
and the abrupt arrival of adulthood. So I thought,
I can see now,
loss.
not just as you're talking, I can see the parallels between a kind of ideal or idyll that kind of promises so much, and then things change, and the idea of maybe going home in inverted commas for Colin becomes more desirable. Kind of, and that whole the whole idea of a summer like no other is a really interesting one as well, because I think maybe perhaps most of us can think of a particular summer where you get perhaps your first love, your first job, your first, there's a time of firsts there, and Colin certainly goes through a number of those.
Indeed.
I mentioned that it's a novel driven by character, and it might be nice to kind of talk a little bit more about some of them. So Colin himself, as you say, comes from the novel opens with him making the journey Greenock to Glasgow to Oban and then to the islands, and it made me think. Now, am I right saying that you've got a kind of similar? You were brought up in Lindsay, is that outside of Glasgow?
That's correct. So, I mean, I could identify with Colin in those respects. My father was from South Uist, my mother from Glasgow. So, that kind of bicultural sort of identity and background. But I must say, as a disclaimer, I was a young 13-year-old in 1978. So,
Right, okay.
some of what Colin got up to, I certainly didn't.
No, I'm not saying it's a verbatim, but I'm interested.
But I can identify to that biculturalism, that bilingualism. Yeah.
I also wondered how, as Colin makes that journey, does he change? And actually, do you feel that when you're moving from the mainland to the islands that there is a change going on?
Do in some ways. I mean, well, one thing I would, certainly in my early days going to Europe on holiday, it was, it would have been in the 70s, and it was it was quite a different place from Lenzie.
Yeah.
So with a very different field, very different culture. My my father, we would often go with my dad on his own, and he would. I think he was on holiday, obviously from his job. I think he would become a more relaxed, different person, and he certainly spoke a different language for most of the 2 weeks that we were there. So yeah, I think there were changes. I think I do feel that. I mean, a sense of a bit more of, well, certainly having gone there mostly on holiday myself, a sense of relaxation. You've got 5 hours ahead of you in your boat. You've finished all that you have to do. Yeah, I think
And
that is true. I think for him though, the change is quite crucial because he's very used to what Barra's like. His mother's from Ellegory in the north end of Barra, and he spent very sort of, I suppose, similar family holidays at home with family, whereas this is going to be quite different. It's got lots of unknown, although people might think it's very, very similar, and culturally there are great similarities between South Uist and Barra, but there's got lots of different elements for him.
yeah, and it's going to be a summer of work as well, with his uncle, and that relationship's really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it takes a while for going both ways for them to kind of understand each other and come to kind of trust each other a bit more.
Indeed, yeah. So and I think that relationship becomes more adult
Yes.
as the novel progresses, and I think that one of the key aspects of the novel is their relationship.
Yeah.
The increasing mutuality of the relationship.
Yeah, and that's it's a fascinating relationship actually, and a really kind of warm-hearted one as well. I feel that kind of beginning to kind of understand. And Colin, as can again happen over a period of a few months, over a certain summer, growing up in inverted commas, certainly the adult world. I mean, by the end, coming kind of crashing into
Yeah.
his world. And Alistair, I was wondering about the character of Alistair. Is this based on someone?
No,
No,
none
okay.
of the characters are based on
Right,
anybody
okay.
that I knew. I'm sure I could say that there are aspects of Colin that I can relate to,
Yes.
but none of the characters are based on anybody real or living. But just that I knew from my research in the archives of Topper and Doge and the School of Scottish Studies that these storytellers, they were very much alive and willing to contribute their stories, and well into the 1980s, and that they had some of these, as I say, these ancient stories were still tripping off the tongue. I mean, I guess another key theme that maybe I haven't touched on is that I wanted to catch a world at a time of significant change. An old world and a newer modern world. The Western Isles Council had been in existence for 3 years. Up until then, Uist was in Inverness County Council, and Lewis was in Ross and Cromarty. But for the first time, the Western Isles, the whole archipelago, were under the one council, and they were making great strides in terms of improvements. But so there is lots of modernity is certainly there, and they're watching this World Cup in colour. I think for the first time, I don't think colour was there in 1974 World Cup, but there's still aspects of that older world. Alistair lives in a thatched cottage without electricity. He's got water in a pipe at the end of the gateway. So, and that there were plenty of people. My great uncle was living in a similar. So the houses are based on houses that I knew. My great uncle lived in a very similar house until 1976, so just 2 years before. And my great aunt lived in the larger house that's called Erstal House in the book.
Yeah, the reason I thought maybe there was a character behind Alistair is because he is this oracle of story, this kind of, he has all of these, but I guess there'll be plenty of people that were like that.
Yeah.
And I think as well, when modernity hits kind of rural areas, it hits with more impact. It's noticed, if you're in towns or cities, there's a more of a maybe a creep to the modernity coming in different areas. But when something comes in to somewhere which hasn't had perhaps that modernity, it can really hit, I'm thinking of oil refineries suddenly appearing or airports suddenly appearing or that kind of thing, that's quite a difference.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. So I think that it's easier then to sort of show stark contrasts.
Yeah, and
I
so
suppose the
another,
other thing I wanted to
yep,
show was, although Alistair is 88, lives in the house that I described, and telling these ancient stories, he's still alive in 1978, and some of the aspects of modernity, some of the aspects I'm sure that are affecting Jane in her marriage, he's not, he's not oblivious to them. He's not kind of sort of retained an aspect. He's a real living person,
yeah.
and living in 1978, albeit in what might seem externally to be in circumstances of another era.
And I don't know how much you want to say about Jane, but Jane's another central character in this. And as you mentioned, married, but not particularly happily so. And there's things happen with relationships there which are complex. I'll put
Yeah,
it that way.
yeah, indeed. Yeah, she's and as I mean, he's a minor character. Her husband Eowyn, or Eother, which is the Gaelic for Ivor, but he has a major impact. I think he's a bit of a bully and a brute, and all communities have them,
Yep.
or urban and rural. And I think as well that some of her enthusiasm for, I mean, I think she's delighted. I mean, I think she always heard Alistair's telling these stories. I mean, I think she's had a strong and special relationship with him over over many years for her whole life, and is for whatever reason the person that has chosen to, or he's chosen to sort of be his surrogate carer. But I think there's also a safety within his house,
Yeah.
and there's a safety as well in the uncomplicated relationship she has with Colin, and I think some intellectual stimulation,
Yeah.
encouraging her to to to, to continue, for her to make sure that this recording process continues. She's enjoying it.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I won't go
And
much further than that.
so in a large part, the story is about storytelling. And as you've kind of hinted at right at the beginning, storytelling is central to all your work.
Yes, it is. I think, yeah, I think oral storytelling has had an impact on my narrative voice, both in Gaelic and in English. And I think there's just such wealth in these stories, and I think that if I was just involved in something just a week or so ago, telling one of the stories, the one about Diarmid and Grania in the book to a to a live audience, along with some musicians and singers to a live audience. And I think there's still an appetite and an audience for these stories if told well.
And I'm interested as well in representation of the islands in particular. I was at Paisley Book Festival just recently, and I was at an event with Graham McCrae Burnett talking about his novel Benbecula, and Chris Barclay, the man on the endless stairs, which I think the island in that is based on Egg, is my believing. But the panel was called Hebridean Anti-Heroes, which was quite an interesting idea. But I was wondering if you thought that the islands and the Highlands actually have become increasingly popular and perhaps important as a setting. Have you noticed that over your time writing about them and and reading about them as well?
Yes, I think so. I think they have. I think they've captured the imagination of many writers, Graham McCrae Burnett being one of them. Of course, Douglas Stewart's new novel is going to
Yeah,
be
of course.
set in her. Then all the Peter May novels as well. So yeah, there seems to be a great interest to write about the Hebrides, both from people who have had a personal connection with the islands, and those who haven't, but who are intrigued by them. And I suppose that thoughts of isolation, rurality, small communities, close communities, I think they probably lend themselves to storytelling. And I suppose now, and I mean, a certain, there are some dark themes in this book, and I felt comfortable enough to explore them. Going back a few generations, much of what would have been told about the islands would be quite sentimental, and quite, maybe not as true to the nature of the societies, because they're almost as complex as they are anywhere else.
Yeah. Well, that was one of the other interesting things, because I think we often think of anything set on an island as being almost a kind of locked room thing, where you can't escape. But actually, your characters move between islands quite the thing. It's not a problem.
Absolutely. And I know many people sailed the world.
Yeah, exactly.
Came back
exactly. But it was interesting to hear that, because often you think, oh, someone can't get off the island, but actually in modern day life, that's just not the case. Yeah. And I'm interested as well, because reading it, some of the situations and some of the things that happen, it probably, and I'm including myself in this, breaks down certain prejudices of your idea of what island life certainly was and maybe is. It made me think of when I read Kevin McNeil's The Stornoway Way. Yeah. I was like, oh, okay, this is something I can recognise as someone born and raised in Glasgow, or at least raised in Glasgow. It's a kind of modern depiction of life with all the kind of rough edges. I think that was the first time I read something like that. Was that something you're aware of? That this is contemporary island. It's the 70s, I know, but kind of contemporary island life.
Yes, I wanted to. I mean, I think the story, once I began to explore the characters and their journey, I think it sort of fell into place, and I guess I did want to give what I felt would be a true reflection of certain types of characters and certain types of situations. And, we all hope to avoid cliches and stereotypes, and I certainly hope I achieved that. And I think I felt that I could take it into some of those darker places without suggesting that, that was necessarily typical or representative. And I think most of the characters in this book are good people doing their best. Yeah. But all societies have nastier characters, and
I'm very, very aware of not giving away any spoilers. But what I will say is that throughout the novel, you lay a kind of clues is maybe the wrong thing, but you hint at what could be happening later on. Yeah. But when it does, the impact is no less.
Yeah, well, thanks for that, Alistair. I hope it wouldn't be.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and it's really shocking. It's supposed to be shocking, and that's, I think, the sign of how well it's written. To be honest, go back to in the summer of 1978 in the backdrop of the World Cup. Now, this was the first World Cup I remember. I was 8 in 78. So, why was this just the perfect timing for Colin? For all sorts of reasons, or was there a specific reason that this World Cup was the one that you were going to have, or any backdrop, if you like?
I think when I first began to research the novel and to when it would be based, I think the two houses came to mind, and I was thinking that maybe 1976 would be good because I knew for absolute certain that house was there and it was as described. But then, of course, I began to think, well, actually, in terms of plot, plot interest and drive, 2 years later is not going to make a huge difference in terms of, ancient versus modernity in the society, but would give you, another dimension, and also another reason for a bit of travel up and down the island, another reason for Colin and Rory to engage with some other members of the community, particularly the priest, who's also from Barra, and Father Patrick, Mischief Patrick, and he and Roa, they have a bit of a, I suppose you could call it, gently competitive relationship, and being the two, two Barra men of whatever, of their status, I guess, in a small island. And I thought he was an interesting character.
Absolutely.
An opportunity, and also to present, I suppose, masculinity is probably a big theme, really, and
it's a huge part of it, and not just just not playing to stereotypes, masculinity of all sorts.
Yeah, Yeah. So football in 1978 brought males together. Well, some females, but males gathered around those TVs in higher numbers. I think it would be fair to say.
Yeah. It's really interesting because it kind of was the World Cup, I would suggest, and maybe recent things have changed that really kind of scarred a few generations about football. I can remember, Hampden being full with people to say cheerio to the team, to go to Argentina, and we genuinely thought people listening to this who weren't aware of it might not believe us, but people thought we were going to win the World Cup.
Convinced we were going to win. Ali McLeod, the manager, had us all convinced.
Oh, we'll talk about the Pied Piper. I mean, it really was sensational. Yeah. And then what was interesting for me to kind of read those bits where you're kind of, it is in the background, but they're getting together to watch the games and then talk about how badly the games have often gone, or in one case, how well the game's gone. But the little details I'd kind of forgotten about, the drug scandal and various other things that had kind of gone on behind the scenes. And of course, this is happening on the other side of the world as well, which gives it a distance that is interesting.
Yeah. I thought it gave an interesting dimension. It gave it another dimension. It took you out of South Uist to some extent in terms of where the action was happening. It was really fun to research it, actually. And of course, the games do happen on the correct day at the correct time and all that kind of stuff, and that gives helps a wee bit of structure.
That's exactly right. It helps set not just the summer, but sets the particular times of the summer, because this was when people would maybe get together who maybe wouldn't have got together otherwise, and that creates all sorts of things too.
Indeed.
And when you've got your novel published and it's out there, I'm always interested in when you've decided, yes, it's done. I'm not tinkering this anymore. The edits have been done and it's all signed off on. Do you leave it alone or do they stay with you? Because these are characters, certainly some of them, that I think stay with me.
Yeah. No, they have stayed with me long after. I mean, I suppose I must have started. So the Gaelic version came out in 2018. I think I must have started it in 2015. So they've been and I haven't written any. I've written some more fiction since then, but I haven't written any other novels since then. I've been working on poetry and then a collection of traditional stories for when I say for children, but aimed at, I suppose, children and families, I guess. Yeah. But so I suppose I've been living this novel, and these characters have been in my head for up to 10 years. So I'm still with them. I'm almost getting to the stage where I'll move on to something new, but they're still very much in my head.
And again, I don't want to give anything away, but the final chapter is a really interesting one, and it kind of reflects on what's gone before. Can you talk about that at all?
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, I mean, I was hoping that you would enjoy the final chapter and the readers would enjoy the final chapter, and I think it sort of nails why the story had to be told, and to whom, and why the story had to be told in Gaelic as well. I think we understand at the end of the book, and that's maybe one of the reasons that even in the English version there's still quite a lot of Gaelic in the text, is that Colin's telling the story in Gaelic.
Yeah, absolutely, it does that, and it really does. again, it's a bit of a surprise to come to it, but it really does kind of finish the book perfectly. You've mentioned what else you've been working on since the novel came out, and it might be nice to hear about some of your other work. I mean, you write poetry, short stories, you're a storyteller as well. You talk a little bit about that, Martin?
Sure. So I suppose I could. I'll show you my. I'll show you my oeuvre.
Yeah, sure.
So I've got. There's a pile of books for you. So I've got about 14. Been writing for over 25 years. First book was published in 2003. Collection of short stories, 14 in Gaelic, 4 in English, called Ahanya, which means reacquaintance. And I've been writing a mix of poetry and fiction and poetry since then, both long and short fiction and poetry. So nine works of fiction, 3 collections of poetry, and 2 books of children's stories. So I suppose the most recent ones, in addition to the book and the novel in Gaelic and English, were collection of poetry called Reminisce, or in English, Running Between Two Dragons, or in Welsh, Rhedeg Rheng Dewi Drag, or in Catalan, Corrent entre dos Drac. So poems stimulated by visits and travels in Catalonia and Wales, in Gaelic, Welsh, Catalan, and English. So that came out. That's my most recent poetry collection in 2024 by Francis Luath Press. What else? An English collection called Poems. That's fairly recent. Poems chiefly in the English dialect. A bit of a play on the Burns, title. Poems chiefly in the Scottish dialect. And as I said, this first collection of poetry as well was called Dance from Letalis, Let Me Dance With Your Shadow, from Luath Press. And this is and then some other novels. There was a huge scheme of encouraging Gaelic writing, fiction writing, called Scale from 2003 onwards. That's 2 of them. Jim Nippers Chiquietin, Wednesday Jim Nippers, and Ilasacha, The Longest Day. 2 novels, the early novels of that series. And then a collection of short stories by Achgar, most in Gaelic, with 1 section in English, called Cala Bendita Severlachen, which is Cala Bendita and its blessings. And it's about, part of it takes place in Scotland and other parts take place in Spain and Mallorca and the Basque Country. And then this is the most recent book, Dorling Kindersley, called Celtic Myths, illustrated, beautifully illustrated. Book, beautifully illustrated, aimed at 7 to 9-year-olds, but I say anyone between 7 to 9 and 79 will enjoy it. And these are stories, many of them I've told orally for many years, especially the ones from Scotland and Ireland. There's also other stories from Wales and from Brittany, Isle of Man, and Cornwall. So that's
has traveling to other places which have their own language, which is maybe not the most commonly spoken one, Wales, Catalonia, does that make you reflect on modern Gaelic and how it's viewed and used?
Hugely, and I think it's inspired me and encouraged me to continue to write in Gaelic. I could read a wee poem, the opening poem from the book Rhiat of Diagragan, because it kind of expresses that.
Okay, that would be great.
It's this poem, which is called Languages in Catalonia, Canon in the Catalonia, is about how Gaelic feels in Catalonia. And I could probably preface that by saying there are, although only maybe 18% of those in the Kingdom of Spain speak Catalan, that amounts to some 9 million people. So I'll read it. Will I read it in Gaelic and in English?
Yes, absolutely.
It's also in Catalan and Welsh. They're all the poems are in Gaelic. It doesn't, even whether they're from Catalonia or Welsh, they're in all 4 languages. But anyway, Canon in the Catalonia. Leis nach clínar I bhéarla a plí nach aniu sa bheile seo. Snaki I Gaelic amachas a sniki. Sati I bhuipi, is suíle go cormach cíndeach I the bhus Canon. A horse to sidiv, ag bar is bars to jenken and bell. Gai ella die 4 foemen, na ni soelen is lawan Catalan na san anashe, na a rikris el Castellano wat de Tsjechgerach jalasich a boig heen. En nu sanau, no nou sanu, no nu sanu sanau. Da hadden is gachud in griev, gun ga, gun allevum. San fallon the haag, ga de horsted gruge, fata politics is fulungus, carriachin na garachin sin jawachel. Since je week wachtel akinje, geha ioch. Languages in Catalonia. Since English is not often heard spoken in this part, Gaelic crawls out of its shell, casts it off, and sits with a balanced, confident voice on the bus of languages, orders easily at the bar and table of living tongues. She pays close attention to the expression of their sounds, what the eyes and hands of Catalan do to marshal them, how Castellano responds with his own eager body talk, back and forth, or forth and back, or back and forth. Bilingualism expressed without resentment or offence, to forge bonds, like a face with laughter, far from politics and suffering, friends, still friends as they part, and our little uncompromised one, invited back for more.
Oh, thank you so much, Martin. That's fantastic. We should say, where if people are interested in finding out all about your work, what's the best thing they can do?
I suppose just maybe Google my name and then some of the books will come up. I don't have my own website or anything like that. The different publishers will have the books under them. Both the Scottish Book Trust and the Scottish Poetry Library will have got a bio there, and there's a list of my publications there.
We should say A Summer Like No Others, published with Luath, isn't it?
It is indeed. Yeah, it is indeed.
Well, Martin, I think that's the perfect place to finish it. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me and for your readings.
Thank you very much indeed. Thanks for having me, Alistair. It's been great. Thanks very much indeed.
And we'll be back soon with someone completely different.